He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock. This week we talk to the prime movers of a new news startup that's not yet underway but which popped up online this week, offering the prospect of six-figure salaries for senior staff in the regions. So how will that work, and what might it offer the regions and the nation? That's coming up later. And last week it was flying pizza, and this week airborne snacks were back in the headlines again.
Look, I think there is fairly strong opinions about in-flight snacks.
But are we as excited as our media about our national carriers' in-flight fodder? But before all that, we look at RNZ's big boost in funding that was announced recently after the plan for a public media entity 4 years in the making burned up on that bread and butter policy bonfire. And what else in broadcasting public media remains in play?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister for Broadcasting and Media, what announcements has he made regarding funding for world-class public media?
The Honourable Willie Jackson.
Mr. Speaker, today I've announced that we're delivering a funding boost to deliver world-class public media for all New Zealanders.
That was Labour MP Naisi Chen with a powder puff of a patsy question in Parliament for her government's Broadcasting and Media Minister Willie Jackson. But back on the 6th of April, it was a query the Minister was only too happy to answer.
Radio New Zealand will receive a 60% increase, Mr. Speaker, of $25.7 million annually. This funding will help it meet competing demands and deliver world-class public media for all of Aotearoa.
That funding boost was big for RNZ's bottom line for sure, but it was also billed as a saving by the government that same day because this was a backstop for the collapse of the government's new public media entity plan, which would have had a much bigger bill. And Newsroom's co-editor Mark Jennings, formerly a long-serving TV3 News chief, reckoned that the much-repeated world-class public media Willie Jackson spoke of there seemed an optimistic outcome if you took the government's previous words literally when he wrote this.
Until weeks ago, the future of Aotearoa New Zealand's public media organisations was looking so grim, the government was prepared to spend $370 million over 4 years to merge TVNZ and RNZ.
But while what Willie Jackson announced on April the 6th was effectively a pre-budget announcement concerning RNZ, with a one-off boost of $10 million for the broadcasting funding agency New Zealand On Air thrown in as well, Willie Jackson and Cabinet have much more on their minds. When Willie Jackson told reporters there would be a big announcement the day before the big reveal, he also told reporters he was working on a broadcasting strategy for all New Zealanders. And after the announcement back on April the 6th, he faced non-powder puff questions about that from his opposition counterpart in Parliament, Melissa Lee. And Willie Jackson's rebuttal made plain just how much needs to be done, if only legislatively, late in Labour's second term.
RNZ Charter Review, the ANZ PM Bill included a new charter designed for a modern fit for purpose national public media entity. We'll use that good work to update and strengthen our RNZ Charter. And Mr. Speaker, my officials are looking to modernise our outdated Broadcasting Act legislation that the useless National Party put in place.
And even aside from all that, there's also the matter of what now for state-owned TVNZ, which is now not only not being merged with RNZ, but is also looking for a new chief executive to replace the current one who's leaving in June. And several new board members are needed urgently also to oversee whatever the new direction is, if any. Because the minister has hinted it won't be highly commercial business as usual for TVNZ. On the day he announced the new funding for RNZ, RNZ's midday news host Charlotte Cook asked Willie Jackson if TVNZ's future has been aired by the Cabinet.
We're exploring ways TVNZ can play a more active public broadcaster role, and we might be able to do this in terms of their charter, maybe looking at a charter or in strengthening and monitoring their reporting requirements. So you know, for us, you know, they're a very, very important part of the jigsaw puzzle or the ecosystems.
The previous TVNZ charter was introduced by a Labour-led government in 2002 and then scrapped by an incoming National-led government less than 10 years later. Now, some commentators have claimed recently that the current minister is now pursuing the goals of the public media merger by other means, like leaning on TVNZ. And in what was Mediawatch's first opportunity to talk to the minister since the big announcement earlier this month, Hayden Donnell asked Willie Jackson about that. But first, what does Willie Jackson and what should RNZ's audience expect from the RNZ funding boost he announced recently? And would that actually include a new digital platform, as the official announcement seemed to suggest?
Kia ora, Minister Jackson. Welcome to Mediawatch.
Kia ora. Good to have a bit of a kōrero with you today.
So the $25 million funding announcement for RNZ included $12 million for a new digital platform. So do you actually expect RNZ to create an entirely new brand or service there?
Not at all. I think there was some crosswire with my officials there that shouldn't have actually gone out that way. I know that I've spoken with RNZ and my officials have spoken with them, and what I do expect is that they will work on the existing service. And the other side of it, it's really up to RNZ. It's not for us to say what has to happen. RNZ is independent from government and will make its own operational decisions. But I would imagine that they will work on what's going to happen in terms of the current digital infrastructure and upgrade things in terms of the websites, in terms of the apps. And I'm looking forward to see what RNZ comes up with.
In February 2020, we did propose this new youth service, and Dr. Jim Mather said, this youth service would explore civic and financial, lifestyle and well-being issues for youth. I wonder whether some of that $25 million will go towards a youth service.
Again, it's up to RNZ. It's not for me to tell them where it should go. But, in our general kōrero, we've talked about youth, we've talked about Māori, we've talked about Pacifica, underserved audiences. And I think that extra 12 million will really help National Radio RNZ to find those audiences again, our regional audiences. National Radio has been hampered and restricted in terms of, getting to those audiences. In my kōrero with the RNZ, they actually haven't talked about a new digital website. They talked about upgrading things and building on what was already there.
Yeah, so just to clarify, you're not saying you must build a new youth service, but you are hoping that RNZ, with the new money, will be reaching out to some of those underserved audiences, so like young people.
Absolutely. But it's, again, not for me to tell RNZ what to do. I think it's no secret that, I have talked with them about young people. I've talked to them about Māori. I've talked to them about Pacifica. I've talked to them about the regions. And this will help. And RNZ has told me they want to develop a new audience experiences by delivering more news and content.
Yeah, so you're mentioning that you've talked a bit to RNZ ahead of this funding announcement. Did they actually, or RNZ, provide a budget or a wish list of sorts for the additional funding?
They've been very clear how limited and how restrictive the funding has been. So I haven't spoken with them all the time, but my officials have come back to me with what their wants were. Did they give some numbers to officials? Well, they worked through that. All I knew is that if we really wanted to make an impact, we had to make and give a significant fund across to Radio New Zealand. I think in the end, a 60% boost was probably even a surprise to maybe people like yourself.
Can we talk about some underserved communities? Can we talk about Māori and Pacifica communities? Because what additional Māori and Pacifica content do you actually hope for out of the new funding?
Again, it's going to be very much up to RNZ, but obviously I would like to see more Māori and Pacifica programming and news. That's something that has been acknowledged from National Radio. On top of that, you've got an extra 10 million built in with New Zealand On Air, who are tasked with also, finding those audiences in terms of Māori and Pacifica. And the other side of it is, I do have a Māori media strategy that I've overseen, and we gave 40 million to that strategy. So, if we can complement what we're doing in a Māori sense, what we're doing in a Pacifica sense, I think that'll be, for communities, I think it'll be great for RNZ. I have been, you know my background. I came from the Māori broadcasting area. In earlier years, I have been a critic of National Radio in terms of how they've addressed.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
No problem.
Back when you were a commentator, not a politician, you said that you're more likely to hear a bird than a Māori on RNZ. And things have changed a little bit since then, but there's still no Māori presenter on any of this station's 5 top shows. We've just lost Māori Dunlop, a really prominent Māori broadcaster. Do you think that RNZ is still too reluctant to put Māori in these front-rank presenting roles?
I think RNZ is trying. That's all I ask is for RNZ to try. I don't resolve from there. I don't regret anything I did before because I just want that to lead to meaningful change. And after all that criticism, I signed an MOU with RNZ when I was involved in broadcasting before, and I've seen some of the changes. People are speaking Māori on RNZ, which is terrific. I know for a fact there's been serious approaches to different Māori broadcasters. Some of those broadcasters, for some unknown reason, haven't taken up the opportunity. So I would only ask that a major effort be made by RNZ. I'm comfortable with that. Some people could say, well, you're a bit hypocritical now. You're the minister. You've got a different view. Yes, you criticise, but are you prepared to get your hands dirty and work with roll your sleeves up and work with organisations? And I'm happy to advance RNZ's agenda because I can see the effort going in. We don't have Māori in those prime time positions, but I don't think it's because of a lack of effort from Radio New Zealand management in terms of trying to find the right people.
Now, whatever effort has gone in, though, I mean, you told Newsroom recently, it is vital that all New Zealanders are seeing and hearing themselves in our public media. Now, when you look at RNZ's roster, its lineup of programs, is everybody hearing and seeing themselves in our public media currently? Particularly, are they hearing and seeing themselves on RNZ?
Even your senior management would probably admit there's some way to go. We need more Māori voices, and I'm pleased with the effort. But, people still making big contributions to RNZ. You've got Julian Wilcox there. Māori, sadly, has just left, but it's a long process, and I'm looking forward to more Māori voices coming through over the next couple of years. I know that your CEO is making an effort, and I hope that effort continues.
I saw Mihi Ngarangi Forbes. She suggested that some of the investment in RNZ might be perhaps better redistributed to some of the 21 iwi radio stations that are sometimes the only voice on offer in a crisis. Now, do you have some sympathy for that view?
That view is born from giving up on RNZ making a rollout change. In terms of the iwi stations, they've received more support and funding from me than any other, ever. They've had the biggest increases ever. I know iwi radio history backwards, having been the chair for 9 years. I was the chair of the 21 Māori stations. Most of them are sufficiently funded at the moment. They will say otherwise, but I know the needs out there and obligations. So though they will scream poverty every time, I think their needs are looked after. Have Māori been underfunded?
Do you really think, though, that RNZ is going to find these audiences? It doesn't have a great track record of reaching youth. It doesn't have a great track record of reaching Māori in regional areas. Do you trust it to find these audiences?
I trust that there will be an effort made. I'm sure we'll find out over the next couple of years if that's going to be the case. But the other reality that we got, and we found out during the ANZPM process, there's going to have to be a high level of collaboration. If there is no collaborative approach with iwi radio, with whakaata Māori, then you won't hit those audiences. That we have seen that in past years. I was involved in Mana Māori media in the 90s when we were doing Mana News in terms of national radio. I ran the Wātea News on national radio.
Does this clash a little bit, though, with you were saying that some of this budget doesn't really need to go to these iwi radio stations? Because I guess what you're proposing here is that RNZ really does need to collaborate with the iwi radio stations to make sure that it reaches the right audiences.
There's two sources of funding here. We have to look after our iwi radio stations in terms of our commitment to the Te Reo Māori, but also for them to flourish, they need to be given opportunities. RNZ can present those opportunities by showcasing some of the stories that is happening at iwi radio level. It's not about, you can't just give up and say, well, you Maoris, you don't do that thing and we'll do this thing. There's got to be a time when we come together and, where there's a will, there's a way. And
moving on, Is this money enough to ensure RNZ's sustainability? Because, I mean, when the merger was being sold to the public, I think Jacinda Ardern said RNZ was in danger of collapse. I remember your government said that this merger needed to happen because our current public media, it's just not going to be able to compete with the social media giants, the pace of technological change. Is just throwing $25 million at RNZ going to be enough?
I think it's enough for now. You know, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Expected, you're talking about a 60% funding increase here, but you know, this is a tough world. We've got declining audiences, declining revenue. You've got competition everywhere in terms of the big digital players around the world. So I think it's enough to start off with. But, you know, if we're able to build on this, because I see this as the first part of a broadcasting strategy that will also see me talking to TVNZ about the role they play as a public media entity. I also want to have a look at the RNZ charter, maybe put in a TVNZ charter, look at how we capitalise on the Māori media investment, looking at media content that has been jumped upon by the big companies, and we've seen small and local regional media companies getting left out and the big players not coming to the table. So I want to roll out an online news bill. And on top of that, we're looking at the Broadcasting Act. And if I can pull those other parts together, we've got a sort of comprehensive and coordinated New Zealand broadcasting strategy.
Well, there's a lot in there, but I mean, TVNZ once did have a charter. It didn't particularly go well and it was dropped. Are you looking at reintroducing one, and has that been raised with TVNZ?
We've mooted it. Obviously, the Prime Minister talked about it. I've sort of talked about it. But I think, you know, if we're serious about a public media entity, we're going to have a look at the charter. You know, we had a charter in terms of the Aotearoa New Zealand public media entity that we're going to look back at and see if we can incorporate some of that cope-up, some of those initiatives, maybe in our RNZ one. Not a huge RNZ charter review, but we will review it. And then we'll see, is it possible to maybe even look at a possible TVNZ charter. These are the things I want to roll out with TVNZ people. Obviously, we're looking also at the composition of the boards, RNZ, TVNZ. You know, my hope is that RNZ and TVNZ work closely together. That's my hope into the future, you know, and some people think that's impossible. Well, that's what we were going to do with the merger. It would be good if we could bring TVNZ, a bit closer to what RNZ does. It's not about, obviously there's going to have to be a commercial strategy in terms of TVNZ, but it's about getting the balance and reminding them that they're an essential part of New Zealand as a public media entity. They're imperative in terms of our future, and working in tandem with RNZ would be really, really good. But it's not changing drastically what they're doing, but maybe just looking at, how they are looking at Māori, Pacific, Asian, disabled and youth audiences. How does that work in terms of their obligations? And I'm looking forward to those talks over the next few weeks.
You've mentioned to reporters in the past, you've mentioned it to me, you are preparing a broadcasting strategy for all New Zealanders. This extra RNZ funding fits within that. When can we expect just further public media policy announcements on that front?
Well, I mean, there's 5.5 months to go to the elections. We'll be doing announcements over the next couple of months. We've got a budget coming up. I'm looking closely at working with Māori media at the moment. We'll have more news on our online news bill, which is important in terms of news media companies being paid fairly for their content that is used online by companies like Google and Facebook. So all those types of announcements will be made over the next probably 3 months.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Kia ora. Thank you, mate. All
Kia
of
ora.
this. Kia ora. Kia ora.
That was the Broadcasting and Media Minister, Willie Jackson, talking there to Hayden Donnell. As you heard Willie Jackson say there, One of the government's hopes is that a bigger budget for RNZ will make RNZ national more truly national again. And that's a recognition of the fact that beyond its Auckland and Wellington headquarters and smaller bureau in Christchurch and Hamilton, RNZ News only has a presence in a handful of other places these days. Now, other mainstream media companies have also cut back in the regions over recent decades, which led to the creation of the publicly funded Local Democracy Reporting Scheme back in 2019. Now, this is run by RNZ, and it covers the cost of reporters in 14 places in local newsrooms around the country, which might otherwise struggle to employ journalists to cover significant local and civic issues. Since 2020, it's been funded through the Public Interest Journalism Fund, a 3-year initiative which just this week announced its final grants of public money. And among them was funding for journalism jobs in Waikato, Marlborough, Bay of Plenty, Coromandel, Tairāwhiti, Otago, and even some local Auckland communities. But with the Public Interest Journalism Fund now out of time and money, the long-term future of all these regional jobs isn't known. Well, this week, adverts appeared online seeking expressions of interest from reporters in regional New Zealand, but advertising the sorts of salaries that those in the big towns and cities might expect. Pay rates for senior journalists in the $90,000 to $120,000 range, while juniors, they say, will be paid $50,000 to $70,000, along with an employee share scheme, a company car and other benefits, and all that according to the ads for the new Regional News Network. Now, if that name means nothing to you, well, that's no surprise. The Regional News Network is a startup that's just now starting up, but which has plans to be based in 17 locations, with a senior and a junior journalist in each one, all backed up from a head office in Queenstown and a technical and sales staff headquarters in Auckland. Now, coincidentally, something similar but bigger kicked off in Australia in 2021, news.net.au, with this pitch to its potential clients.
Over 1,300 news websites across Australia, delivering a comprehensive coverage that no other media can compete with. One simple media buy, where you can reach nearly every city coast to coast and everywhere in between. News.net is making a special offer to a limited number of international, national, state and local foundation advertisers who have the foresight to seize this great potential and rare opportunity.
Now, newsnet.au had some great people involved at the start, and it hired others, but it didn't have enough backing or technical skills and resources to ever fully launch. Well, the business brain behind the new regional news network here is Tim Martin, the former founder of sports streaming services Rugby Pass and Coliseum, and more recently, but just briefly in 2022, the chief executive at the NBR. And the founder and chief editor of the proposed network is Peter Newport, formerly a journalist for several New Zealand news organisations, before he set up his own multimedia news service called Crux in Queenstown back in 2018 to cover news and issues in the Southern Lakes region.
Crux has been an experiment to see if there's an appetite and a market for what you might call robust news. I think there's been a tendency all over the world for local news to become quite cautious, in the sense that you can't bite the hand that feeds you. So in a local community, unlike a national media situation, and what tends to happen with community media and newspapers in particular, is they tend to adopt something of a community stance. So there isn't much holding of power to account. When journalists start, the pay in the regions has been pretty poor, so they have the good ones migrate to the cities for more pay. Crux has worked in the sense that we're now the biggest source of online news, but what we haven't achieved is economies of scale. It's only by networking the Crux model that it's going to be sustainable, so that journalists, to put it crudely, have more strength, better paid, and they have more resources to keep going at these organisations that simply are not used to being held to account and being asked the tough question. And the 17 locations are designed to provide 17 hyper-local platforms like Crux, so nothing in Wellington, nothing in Auckland, nothing in Christchurch, but a senior journalist in each location on very high pay. That's important. Journalists have been underpaid for decades, so our model includes high pay for a senior journalist who in effect becomes an editor. They're not answerable to us. They are running their own publication. A junior journalist on around 60,000, which again is well above market, and a salesperson. So broadly speaking, that hub costs around $390,000, which is about as cheap, we think, as you can get a viable hyper-local news platform. All the technology, of course, is centralised. The sales are centralised. But those journalists will be producing 40 to 60 stories a day, some of which will only be of interest locally, some of which will be of interest nationally to other regions. But we think people who live in Wellington, Christchurch and Auckland will also be interested in reading those stories.
Well, Tim, if I could turn to you. So you've got a track record of online media entrepreneurship, let's put it that way.
Sure.
But things like, say, Coliseum or Rugby Pass, I mean, those are attractive areas to elite sports where you'd have a national audience to try and, of course, you've got big competitors in those markets, but this is a very different proposition, isn't it? Isn't this essentially something where established local media companies like the newspaper chains are struggling to keep going and to employ adequate journalists and do the coverage? I mean, what makes you think that doing this online, you can do this with what Peter's describing, high pay, recruiting good journalists and actually feeding a network of stories that will be nationally significant?
I think that is a really strong product in New Zealand. It's probably a stronger product than rugby, with more potential. It has
bigger than rugby. Big call in New Zealand to market. That's good. Yeah.
I think the right sort of news is. It's certainly got a broader reach, because if things aren't working, private sector money is withdrawn, quality of journalism decreases, you're into a vicious spiral. Strong and independent journalism is a very, it's a pillar of democracy.
National or competing newspaper companies right now, let's call them newspaper companies, but online media operations as well, say NZME with papers in the North Island and then a national audience for its herald.co.nz, and that, of course, allied to all its radio properties and the other content from that. Then we've got Stuff, I guess the biggest, by some distance, truly national, perhaps our only truly national news country with journalists up and down the entire country. Even RNZ can't really boast that, even though we're a national journalism operation. And so online, those two brands are huge. They've got massive audiences. Isn't it going to be difficult for a new network to undercut that, particularly if they don't have a presence in the metropolitan areas where a lot of news obviously still comes from?
This isn't a home run hit, lay down misère sort of play. There's work to be done. The key to it is hyperlocal journalism is underserved in the regions. We've built a business model that looks to be sustainable financially, and that's really the critical element. Journalism can only improve and be better funded, and journalists can get paid more when you've got a sustainable business money. So you need a business that actually makes money. We can build a business that is complementary to the ones that exist. I don't see us as anything like competitors to NZME. I think they've got a business that they've done an amazing job turning around and really sort of taking forward with some really clear strengths that are in other areas. So I think there is a bit of a gap for this kind of product. If you think about New Zealand's economy, 90% of the products that we sell overseas, so 90% of our exports are from the regions. It's actually the regions that make all the money for New Zealand. Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, we're just big consumption centres. Just suck it all up. But, we sell money, we sell tourism, we sell apples, we sell fish, we sell milk, we sell cheese. That's what New Zealand's economy is about. That's the regions. That's where those stories are happening. And I don't accept for a second regional news as anything but the most important news in the country.
And Peter, if I turn to you, I know you've been having meetings with government politicians, opposition politicians, government departments and ministries that have a relevant interest. How much depends upon their support and, to be blunt, persuading the powers that be that the public purse needs to come into play here? Because as we know, in recent times, the government has acknowledged that the public media is more than just publicly owned media and that the public purse has a role to play. Does this project depend upon that?
Government funding of journalism became very controversial because of just the way PIJF was perceived, and I think that's caused extraordinary pain for the government. They feel that they were misunderstood, and the impression we're getting is they're not going to do anything like PIJF again anytime soon. We're also looking at the wreckage of the merger. We're recognising with government that the problems that the merger was designed to address are still there. Mm-hmm. They're not solved. We talked to Meta and we talked to Google, and they themselves are quite distressed. They've just, I think, recently announced another 10 or 12,000 redundancies. So I think the answer to your question is that government need to do something to reassure the public funding is there, but the public, because of PIGF, is suspicious of handouts and suspicious of strings being attached. So I think what this project provides for government is the opportunity to back journalism without those strings being attached.
Are you putting to them a particular proposal that says, how about you kick in this much, we'll raise this much from commercial partners? Is that the nature of the pitch, that you actually want them to commit to providing some sort of guarantee of funding for some sort of term in order to get it off the ground?
We're going first. We think private investment is there. We think the 5 revenue streams are important, but there's a role to play for government. There's no doubt about that. It feels like we're pushing at an open door in the sense that everybody recognises that democracy depends on journalism. Government has a role to play, but it's avoiding those strings. It's avoiding those things that can be misconstrued by the public as being government interference. And so I think the model that we're still in talks about will avoid those issues.
Okay, so the 5 revenue streams you talked about there.
Yes.
Okay.
So advertising, love it or hate it, we think it's likely that we'll continue to refuse to accept council advertising. Beyond that, our model is for local salespeople to be selling local advertising. We also have a national ability to take national products like cars or banks to the regions. Secondly, we think readers do want to support journalism, but it's not big bucks. Public do want to help, but we can't rely on it. It's just one of 5. We think that Meta and Google will have a role to play, but their position at the moment is that they're suffering. I don't think that's going to be an easy negotiation. It's going to be sort of down to the wire, but we do expect some progress, and of course Google's Showcase product we're already part of. We actually think that there's room for us to share our content, looking at some revenue from our output being licensed to a national platform. In addition to that, we think there will be some government funding, and whatever arrangement we come to in terms of supporting the launch of our platform, we think will be part of the new day-to-day funding. It sounds like that may end up back with New Zealand On Air. So that's the way we see the chess pieces coming together at the moment.
Okay. And Tim, is this something that you will be actively pitching to commercial clients in order to raise the capital to get this?
I think
this
so.
going?
I will. We have to present a business case that delivers a good return on investment for any investor.
But not as, say, sponsors as well or something like that?
No, not as sponsors. I think, sustainability is fundamental, so it's around forever and can grow. It needs to make money. I mean, that's how we can, pay and grow the journalism base in the country is, profit. Therefore, money can be reinvested.
So it will be an expensive operation. So these will have to be investors who are prepared to, I guess, not expect a return for a little bit of time, at least until things get
No, this is a long-term business play. This is, there's no quick buck about this. This is a project that won't go ahead without the funding. If we cannot raise the money, this isn't the sort of project that you can bootstrap and roll out region by region. It's either a regional news network or it's nothing at all.
Okay, so you wouldn't start with just 5 locations if you
not.
can't. Okay, all right.
I don't think there's any other way to do it, to make it work. You just can't slowly roll out a national network because you're not a national network. If you're not a national network, I don't think you've got a compelling proposition.
Well, Peter, I hesitate to mention this in a way, but you mentioned earlier the government felt a little bruised about that public interest journalism fund and how that fed that perception, or paranoia is another word, about corrupting the media, as if public money hadn't been flowing into public media for decades and decades. But anyhow, do you have to factor in at this point, launching any kind of journalism service at this point, that there is a kind of tide of a bit of cynicism or jaundice about the media?
I don't think being a journalist has ever been easy. I think these are just a new set of older problems. Ever since journalism first emerged, journalists have been accused of being biased because, of course, if you don't agree with a journalist, you're going to call it bias because people have become armchair experts. They say, this isn't news. It must be a quiet news day if you're covering this nonsense. We just say, well, we're not very interested in the public's opinion about the quality of our journalism, because if you don't want to read our stuff, you go and read another media outlet.
Yeah, you see that in the analytics if you want, yeah.
So look, the analytics are great. So people do like what we're doing, but yeah, it's a tough time. It's a really tough time, but people love the truth. And if we as journalists work really hard and we don't blink and we just keep doing our job and we absolutely stick to our principles, eventually the public will come on our side. And I have to say I'm encouraged through our meetings with both the government and the opposition, in the sense that they know that what I've just said is true, that good journalism is a fundamental part of democracy. So if you put aside all the arguments about the TVNZ, RNZ merger, all the arguments about Facebook, all the arguments about conspiracy theories, ultimately we need to know what's going on and we need to trust that source. And the biggest threat I think we have is from public relations and comms people. We can't interview decision makers anymore.
In terms of government, though, or in opposition that you've been speaking to, as you mentioned, I don't expect you to reveal confidential discussions or anything like that, but is their attitude broadly, sounds great, go ahead, and come back to us when you've proved you can do it, or are they really encouraging you and say, yes, we want to see this set up?
Yeah, no, it's strong.
Okay.
And I think there's lots of reasons for that. I think the failure of the merger means that everybody's looking for something positive. I've had a lot of government meetings throughout my career, but I've never seen such a receptive atmosphere, both with opposition and with government. So I think it's the right thing at the right time. And the regional news network, as Tim's explained, doesn't really threaten the incumbents. It solves a problem. And we need to start to get rid of all of those people out there in the regions who call themselves journalists, but who have no experience of journalism, eating the advertising market by publishing media releases that aren't challenged.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was ever a time to rediscover proper journalism, now's that time. And of course, because we've perfected this in Queenstown, those 8 initial senior journalists will be spending a lot of time with us learning the systems and how we manage our day and how we choose the strong stories, how we manage the local government meetings and information act, how we strike the balance between being tough journalists but also being friendly to the community. So we have a template.
Yep. That was Peter Newport, the founder and editor of the online service Crux, based in Queenstown, and the founder of the new startup Regional News Network, a new service to be based in as many as 17 centres around the country. And we also heard there from the Regional News Network's business manager, Tim Martin. And finally on Mediawatch this weekend, last weekend we heard how one big brand fast food chain hit the headlines with stories about pizza delivered by drone being just around the corner. 7 years after a PR campaign by the same companies prompted the media to air the same claim a lot. And airborne junk food was back in the news again this week.
Desperately seeking next-level snacks, Air New Zealand is refreshing its onboard menu for short hops right through to long-haul international. Brace for the chips versus cookie debate and everything in between.
That was Lisa Owen on Checkpoint last Monday, prompted by a media release from Air New Zealand. And what they called the Great Kiwi Snack-Off would be open for expressions of interest until the 1st of May. But expressions of interest from the media last Monday were immediate.
Look, I think there is fairly strong opinions about in-flight snacks. We actually consume 15 million. People are pretty much, they like their snack.
What are you looking for in this next round of snacks?
Air New Zealand was, of course, looking for publicity, and Air New Zealand's Leanne Geraghty got almost 5 minutes of it on Checkpoint last Monday. She had already done more than 6 minutes on snacks on TVNZ's breakfast show earlier that day.
Is launching a national campaign to find Kiwis' favourite snacks to showcase on board their flights. For more on the search, we're joined by Air New Zealand's Chief Customer Officer, Leanne Geraghty.
And the same morning, another 5 minutes on News Talk ZB over a rather grotty phone line.
But really, it's about just stepping things up a notch and being able to showcase some of the fabulous products that are made here in Aotearoa.
Leanne Geraghty, who is Chief Customer and Sales Officer.
Newshub's website was also interested the same morning with the headline, Air New Zealand could be about to ditch the in-flight cookie, while the Herald echoed the media release like this.
Air New Zealand's customers can expect to enjoy a new and surprising in-flight menu aboard domestic and international flights by the end of the year.
Though the story on Stuff made it sound a lot less new and surprising. Air New Zealand is changing up its snacks again, it said, because it turned out that less than 2 years have passed since our national carrier last rotated its in-flight snacks. Nevertheless, no fewer than 5 of Stuff's own travel journalists picked their choice of snack for readers last Monday. Meanwhile, over at the spin-off, Anna Rafferty-Connell reckoned that in-flight snacks, like the Great Air New Zealand Snack Off, were basically just PR themselves.
It's to make us feel like we're getting our money's worth on a $400 flight to a destination that's otherwise difficult to reach affordably and efficiently by any other means of transport.
And responding to Air New Zealand's claim that sustainably packed snacks would get extra brownie points, Anna Rafferty-Connell said single-serve tiny snacks are always going to generate waste as well as expense, and on flights as short as New Zealand ones, attendants have barely cleared away the rubbish from the snacks before they're back again, handing out the end-of-flight lollies. But these, Anna Rafferty-Connell reckoned, had a real purpose.
Sucking them is meant to help relieve pressure on the ears as the plane descends. It's science, which is why you should take 5.
And that issue had already been addressed last Christmas on RNZ's Checkpoint, it turns out, by Lisa Owen, this time with the airline's top gun, Chief Executive Greg Foran.
What's the upper limit for lollies from the basket?
I think 3 is fair.
However, when Stuff opened up one of its readers polls last Monday, about half of 6,000 respondents questioned whether the snacks are needed at all. One of them said,
"We don't need them. Use the cost savings to cut ticket prices."
So, a bit like the not quite imminent after all prospect of pizza by drone, swapping single plastic swaddled snacks in flight got the media going much more, it seems, than their punters. Well, that's all we have for you on the media this weekend, but we'll be back again with more on the media after the 10 p.m. news next Wednesday on RNZ National during nights with Midweek Mediawatch, and then back again with more Mediawatch at the same time next Sunday here on RNZ National.